there's an inherent contradiction in the way Russia is depicted, because on one side, we will have the French foreign minister telling us that, Russia failed in Ukraine.
The eventuality of sending French troops to Ukraine. If we don't do that, we're being told, Putin is going to invade Europe. We'll find him on the Champs-Élysées. We'll find him in the streets of Lisbon. He will attack every country in Europe. We've heard Putin talk about his own discussions with Clinton, and that famous anecdote where in the morning Putin said, well, can we join NATO? Welcome to a new edition of FO Talks. I'm Peter Isackson, Fair Observer's Chief Strategy Officer. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Edouard Husson, historian, educator, geopolitical thinker, president of the Fondation Robert de Sorbonne, and author of an influential book, Comprendre Hitler et la Shoah, Understanding Hitler and the Holocaust. Edward, we know each other, but today I have a multitude of questions to ask you about the state of the world today, which I think people have a lot of reason to worry about. We're hearing on an hourly basis, practically on an hourly basis, that we're on the brink of a global war. And there's very little clarity on why that even may be the case. So maybe we'll talk about that. But let's start with what for me is an even more puzzling question. The foreign policy orientations, if that's what they can be called, of the current crop of European leaders. We're here in Europe. You and I are in France. I've written about it because I've been trying to understand it, but I have no clear explanation of how this happened and how it's likely to evolve. My question is this: how does a professional historian account for what I can only characterize as a general state of intellectual and political confusion? What's your take on all that? How can
yes. Thank you, Peter. Well, the first question is never the easiest. But I will try answering. What is striking for me as a historian is the lack of memory. I would say, because if you look at the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, Europe, let's say Western Europe, but not only, because you could also say that about Central and Eastern Europe under the Soviet rule. Europe played an essential role to end the Cold War. Why? Because the political leaders at that time, they had a very vivid experience of in their mind of the two world wars. Most of them had been going through the Second World War, even if they were only children or in their teens. And they knew what was at stake. And, I will take a very kind of paradoxical example. Not so many people know that Margaret Thatcher is the politician, the prime minister, who convinced Ronald Reagan to speak with Gorbachev. And wow. I take Margaret Thatcher as almost a marginal politician in Europe, because, well, Britain and Europe, that was always a very difficult question. But she was European enough to think we need a dialogue with the Soviet Union, with the new Soviet leader. It's impossible to go on the way we are doing while speaking about the empire of evil and so on. And Reagan was smart enough to listen to her. And let's say that Margaret Thatcher was not the first one to think this way, because you had General de Gaulle in the 1960s, Willy Brandt, the West German chancellor, at the beginning of the 1970s. And let's say, we could mention other people, but let's say that Gorbachev himself, he behaved as a European. He was looking for a settlement, for peace, for stability. I think this is very interesting to compare with the current generation of European leaders. I guess they have absolutely no idea about the role their predecessors played in ending the Cold War. And I would go so far, I would say, without Europe, then in the 1980s, there would have been no ending of the Cold War. But now, what is really a problem, I think, in the current situation with the war in Ukraine, with the war in the Middle East, is that we lack totally this kind of European leader, head of state, prime minister, who would be able to tell the Americans, well, you are very nice, you are friends, but please stop this nonsense, what you are doing. And I guess this is one of the main problems nowadays.
So, are you saying that these people are ignorant of history? They didn't study it. They're not aware of what actually happened, which was in the news. Most of them are in their 60s or 70s. Well, not
Yes.
Macron, of course.
Yes. Macron is young. He was born in 1977. Yeah. So he was approximately 10 years old when the decisive when the key decisions were taken. I guess there are two phenomena. First, they may be ignorant because maybe the way history is taught at school nowadays is not as it was earlier. But I think it goes deeper. It's also, I would say, I would congratulate the Americans too, because they were able to convince the young European leaders, and they have such programs like Young Leaders Program and so on. They were able to convince them that it was the end of history, and the only way to look at the world was looking at it in the American way. And so this is, I guess this is also the result of the very efficient American foreign policy of training the future European leaders. Well, they succeeded, but at the cost of a complex tradition of diplomacy.
So you're telling me what I already know as an American, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, is that, and this is what I learned as a youngster, is that history is the past, and we live in the present, and we're preparing the future. So yeah, we need to know a few names and dates and events, but they're all irrelevant because we have to build from today. So there's no serious reflection. Now, are you saying that the diplomatic tradition in the U.S. is based on this attitude of let's forget about history and let's just build the future?
Yes, I don't want to oversimplify, but I mean this is the trend there as I see that when I speak with my American contacts, with American friends, when I had opportunities to exchange with people active in diplomacy. Well, the strength of the U.S. is that there is a clear view about what the American Constitution is, and that it should be cultivated. And well, you have a very strong constitution, and it has been stable for more than two centuries. But on the other side, I guess this is the main difference between Europe and the U.S. is the role of history in decision making. If you try to solve a European conflict, you won't be able to solve it without including very difficult questions coming from the past in your settlement, and this is what is really dramatic currently in Ukraine, for instance, because you know, I was many times in Ukraine 20 years ago. This is a country which has been not reunited but torn by history. You know, one part of it was what was Austrian before World War One. The western part, the eastern part, was longer inside the Soviet Union than the western part, and so on. So it's a country you should help remain neutral, and you should help them reconcile themselves with their past. Instead of that, what we have done is just telling them, well, you have no past. You are Ukraine as a nation. You have nothing in common with Russia, which is absurd, because even if we defend the idea of Ukrainian sovereignty, of a Ukrainian sovereign state, but they have a lot in common with Russia, from the cultural heritage. For decades, if not centuries, the language was Russian, and so on. So you see, and I understand the efficiency of the American view of things, that Ukraine could be created as a totally new nation and developing a feeling of being Western. But it's a little more complicated than that.
But that has meaning for me. I had a Ukrainian grandfather who died before I was born. But everything I was told about him was that he was a Russian. Well, I knew that he was. His family migrated during the Bolshevik Revolution to the U.S. And they migrated they were living in Kiev, and but I was always told he was Russian. He spoke Russian. He identified with Russian culture. I was comforted because I love Russian literature. I was comforted knowing that my grandfather read Dostoevsky in Russian. So for me, I grew up thinking Ukraine is Russia. And in fact, another curious thing is that when I grew up, it was called the Ukraine, as if it was a region of Russia. And I was surprised when things started blowing up a few years ago, that even Unfair Observer, when I made the mistake of writing the Ukraine, I was corrected by the editor saying, no, it's Ukraine. So it really is a complex culture, it has a complex history. And I've met people. I met a young woman recently just in a park in Paris who was from Odessa, obviously a refugee from the war. And I don't know what she was doing. I think she had a little French kid, so she was an au pair. But she very much considered herself to be Russian. I'm not saying that Ukrainians all consider themselves to be Russian, but as you say, it's complex. There are different traditions that have coexisted, and it's a bit like, I guess, countries like Belgium or Switzerland, where you have different people from different backgrounds, different cultural traditions, different languages, actually living together and attempting to coexist and succeeding largely in coexisting politically. But somehow we're told, and even today I'm reading, all the Ukrainians want to win the war. Is that the case? It doesn't make any sense to say.
No, I will give you an example. I was in Ukraine 20 years ago because I was part of an oral history project about the Second World War. witnesses of the Holocaust, you know, in the Soviet Union, and we were going through Ukraine and asking people about what they saw. You know, this part of the Holocaust which is called Holocaust by bullets. It didn't take place in the gas chambers, but these were commandos like the Einsatzgruppen or the policemen of the German policemen or their collaborators. And it's very interesting because 20 years after the interviews, we had very nice conversation with extraordinary people. You know, they were in their 70s or 80s, and they had all this memory of this history, very difficult history of the 20th century, and they were very free in the way they depicted it. And I remember asking people from Eastern Ukraine, do you feel more like Russians or Ukrainians? And at that time, they would answer, no, we are Ukrainians, but never bring us to a war against Russia. Yeah. It was in Eastern Ukraine. In Western Ukraine, the answer was different. They felt as Ukraine, they didn't want to have anything to do with Russia. But some of the people we were asking, even in the younger generations, they would answer in Russian, you know, when they were asked, not in Ukrainian. So this is a very complex country, and I guess that what has developed is really dramatic, because we have brought Europeans to fight against each other. Because personally, I consider that Russia is a part of European history, and if we come back to diplomacy, since the 18th century at least, Russia was an essential part of the European diplomatic game, and in French we say le concert des nations, you know, as if it was an orchestra and a symphony. Well, unfortunately, I don't consider Mr. Macron or Mr. Merz as contributing to any harmonic development of diplomacy nowadays.
Well, on that score, because we're talking about the European leaders, I wonder about what I keep hearing every day, and that is, you know, these people who are educated people and should know something about history are telling us that if we don't continue the war in Ukraine, which everyone's aware that things are going on today. Obviously, Trump is the catalyst of this, of the idea that there could be negotiations, there could be an end to the war. But we're still being told that if we don't continue to, as Europeans, if we don't continue to support Ukraine and actively, not just financially, but actively, and even today in Le Monde, I think there was, I read a sentence about the eventuality of sending French troops to Ukraine. If we don't do that, we're being told, Putin is going to invade Europe. We'll find him on the Champs-Élysées. We'll find him in the streets of Lisbon. He will attack every country in Europe and reconstitute the Soviet Union or a Tsarist empire. As a historian, I'm sure you don't take that seriously. But how do you explain that people can put forward that idea and expect people to believe it?
Yes, you are right. This is really strange, and there is an inherent contradiction in the way Russia is depicted. You know, because on one side we will have the French foreign minister telling us that well, you know, Russia failed in Ukraine. They were unable to conquer the country in 4 years. On the other side, you will have, at the same time, Mr. Macron telling us we need to send troops there because otherwise Russia will send troops to Paris. This is a contradiction. Is Russia weak or is it strong? You know,
But that's
and
like Bush. Where you remember when Bush
yes,
said, "We're fighting in Iraq so that we don't have to fight them here." And could
yes.
anyone possibly imagine that Iraq was going to attack the U.S.?
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. It's a good comparison, but you speak. I would say you go in the same direction as I went a few minutes ago. It's when I listen to Macron, it's a kind of Americanization, if I may say so, of the European mind. You know, of the European political mind, because I guess what was really extraordinary in European history was for a long time the ability, the capacity to overcome conflicts and bitter conflicts. You know, I think one of the greatest statesmen in French history is Cardinal de Richelieu, who was he died in 1643, but he had been able to choose his successor, Cardinal Mazarin, who was an Italian, and who was the instigator of the Peace of Westphalia.
Yeah.
So you can say this was, well, it didn't prevent war totally in Europe and so on. Well, it didn't prevent local conflicts, but for 150 years, you had no major conflict in Europe, and then after the Napoleonic Wars, the extraordinary thing is the ability of the winners, of the people, of the leaders who had who had been able to prevail on Napoleon. They were able to create peace for 1 century. And the big question for historians is why did it fail in 1914 suddenly? Why did diplomacy fail in 1914? And even after the 2 terrible world wars, this was the I would say the historical greatness of people like de Gaulle and Willy Brandt I was mentioning, and later Gorbachev, and even take Reagan. Reagan was able to listen to European leaders. I'm not sure that Donald Trump is able to listen to European leaders. If we had a sound leader, you know, because the problem is we only have warmongers, or almost only. Well, maybe if you take Viktor Orban, even if you don't like him, but the way he's pleading for peace in Europe is reminding us of the old way of doing things inside Europe. I hope I won't shock your listeners, but that's the way I see that.
Well, Jean-Daniel Ruche said exactly the same thing in an interview I had with him.
Well, he's a diplomat, no question.
He's a diplomat, and we talked about
professional diplomat and an authentic one.
And that reminds me of just another issue, which seems to me so obvious, and it's not ancient history, it's modern history. My understanding, as I've been following events in Ukraine for at least 10 years, is that, and this goes back at least to Yeltsin, is that the Russians have been, ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, they've been looking for their place in the European concert, let's call it. That there was a kind of belief that there could be a concert of nations of which Russia could be a part. We saw that in exchanges between Yeltsin and Clinton. We saw it, we've heard Putin talk about his own discussions with Clinton, and that famous anecdote where in the morning Putin said, well, can we join NATO? And Clinton said, this came out of the Tucker Carlson interview. Putin said, Clinton said, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. Yes, we'll think about that." And the same evening, when they saw each other, Clinton said, "Well, I talked with my team, and that's not on. We're not. That's not something we can." And then, of course, December 2021, you already had 175,000 Russian troops on the border of Ukraine. And Putin sent a letter to both the State Department and NATO saying, well, let's sit down and talk about European security, a security architecture for Europe, which for me translates as an idea that came from the Cold War, collective security, or what do you call it? Indivisible
Yes.
security,
Yes.
which is a great concept. And it seems to me a normal concept, because if we talk about anyone's security, it's always conditional about what others, and especially neighbors, think about that security.
Yes.
Given that Russia has been insisting on what we know from history. First of all, I want to ask you whether it's true that the Russian position has been, over at least the last 20 or 30 years, let's sit down and work out what collective security might look like, and that the anecdote we heard about Clinton saying, well, no, that's not on our program. Is that true?
Yes, that I would even go further, and it will bring us to something which is essential to the understanding of today's crisis in diplomacy. If you look at the vision of Europe developed by Stalin during World War II, when he thought about the years after, and if you go through the whole Soviet leadership until Gorbachev, and then you go to Putin, what you were mentioning, you will see a very striking continuity, because nobody knows, or not so many people know, that Stalin originally didn't want to have the Iron Curtain and to cut Europe in two parts. He had the vision of a zone in Central Europe which would remain neutral. And this concept of neutrality, you find it with the Soviet leadership, and then with Putin. And if you take the text of December 2021, the two notes sent by the Russian Foreign Ministry to the State Department, just erase the date. It could have been written by somebody in the entourage of Stalin. Well, if I say that, people will hear Stalin. Oh, that's horrible! A dictator, Hitler. You see, we are right. Putin is the new Hitler. And the question is, I think this brings us to the key question, and this may be another difference between Europe and the US. For decades, if not for centuries, in Europe, diplomats would say, let's not speak about the internal constitution of countries, of nations, of states. We cannot solve that. Let's be modest. Let's establish peace between different systems. And if Cardinal de Richelieu and others hadn't thought this way, the religion wars would have gone on for decades, if not centuries. So this was their very smart view, that they said, well, let's forget religion. We have Catholics, we have Protestants, we even have two or many kinds of Protestants, Lutheran, Calvinists, and so on. We will never solve that in a political way. So let's bring this out of of diplomacy. Let's try to have a respect for different religious groups inside the same state, and then let's build peace together. I mean, I think that if the European leaders of the 1960s and 70s hadn't thought this way, a real detente would have been impossible. The small, what we call as historians the second Cold War of the years 1977 to 1983, 84. It would have been impossible to overcome that, and settling implementing the German reunification would have been impossible, because people would have said, well, they are communists, they are capitalists, and so on. So, and I think that's the same today. I fully accept that some people will say, well, we don't like Mr. Putin's regime or way of ruling. Well, but that's not my problem. My problem is securing peace in Europe. I'm not sure that I'm happy about everything that Mr. Macron is doing as a French president. But on the other side, I don't accept others to come and tell me what Mr. Macron should be doing. That's our problem as French, and the same for the Russians. So, but I accept with you that this is not a very American way of thinking.
No. Well, we know that Biden framed it as autocracy versus democracy. So he didn't have the pitch we had during the Cold War, which is they're communists and we're capitalists, and these are two different, absolutely incompatible systems in the world. So we didn't accept the idea of multipolarity at all. There had to be some universal formula that could be applied to the entire world. So that was in people's mindsets. But we no longer have that luxury of saying it's a contrary ideology, just as in the 17th century, the 30 Years' War, it was Catholic or Protestant. So one had to win and the other had to lose. But then Biden came up, and this really struck me as soon as he became president in 2020. He said, "Oh, the world is divided into democracies and autocracies, and we have a mission to impose the American century." Now Rubio's talking about the Western century, which is an interesting shift. But you get these shifts that are always going towards a binary division of humanity. So it has to be one side against the other, and it's put us in a mindset that we're on a mission, we're on a crusade, we're on, we're going to war with the other side. And I've been reading. I recently read Jacques Le Goff's book about Louis IX, Saint Louis. And what really interests me in reading it was the fact that was at the height of the Mongol invasion of the whole Eurasian continent. And Louis himself made remarks about, he even said something like, well, either they win or we resist him, but if we lose, we lose. So it wasn't saying we're Christian and we have to defeat them. It was, there is a power game, and he used obviously his own deep religiosity to create a belief, but he didn't use that as, it comforted his belief that he could be victorious. He went off to the Crusades twice, but it wasn't it wasn't the same kind of crusading idea that you see in the work of George Bush or a Biden and now a Rubio, where it's really taking your system and believing that you have to impose it on the rest of the world. And if the rest of the world doesn't accept it, then they suffer the consequences. So it's a strange mindset. And as you say, 40 years ago, that wasn't the case. That wasn't the way political leaders thought. So I'm still wondering how this is all going to change. And that brings me to a point, and a full disclosure, because well, we've known each other only for a couple of months, but it's because we're involved, along with my good friend Pierre Molière here in France, in a wide-ranging project that initiated by a mutual friend of ours in India. And it's a project that aims at exploring and seeking to understand today's geopolitics, and specifically the transition from a unipolar world where you can say we're on the right side and they're on the wrong side, to a multipolar world where different civilizations, different traditions, different languages, different cultures can prosper together and not against each other. And I know one part of it is a project that you shared with us to create an international school of diplomacy. And I think everything we've been talking about gives us an idea of why you would be doing that. But can you tell us more about why we need
yes, yes.
Diplomacy?
Certainly. Well, as we have just said, diplomacy, the word and the practice of diplomacy is almost gone in Europe, with a few exceptions. I guess the Italians still know what it is. We mentioned Hungary. I mean, the current Spanish government, the way they are approaching the conflict in the Middle East, I say, wow, that's the old European tradition. But it's marginal, unfortunately. And so my question, since I'm an academic, I've been managing. I've been dean of a business school. I've been managing academic structures. I thought, well, is it would one of the reasons be that we don't have a school of diplomacy? That was the first time I came to this idea, and I looked for that, and I saw, well, this is a paradox, because for decades, if not centuries, people have learned diplomacy in Europe without a school for that. But maybe it's time to create one. That's my idea. And I think that it could be a place where young Europeans or people with some experience of negotiation, but who would like to train further, they could meet people from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America. And you also have in the US some people who are very concerned with the absence of diplomacy, and we could have a place where students meet, where teachers or experts, trainers on diplomacy meet, and where we just develop a new set of mind, And my idea, it's very ambitious project, but we are part of what you were mentioning, working on multipolarity, creating a network of people defending multipolarity. And the ambition would be to have first a campus for that in India, in New Delhi, and another one in Europe. And let's start with these two campuses. And since we are lucky enough in Europe to still have good relations with India. There is a free trade agreement, and there are good relations between France and India. So let's not destroy it as the other things we have been destroying Europe. Let's have it thriving, and maybe a school of diplomacy which would be built together by Indians and Europeans would be something, because I'm sure that people from all over the world at the end would come and to be trained there. And so that's the basic concept.
Well, we surely, I certainly agree with you that we need it. And I would, if I were asked if you asked me my opinion, I would say the starting point of diplomacy 101 should be the notion of indivisible security.
Mhm.
But and that amuses me because when we hear people talking about peace. Peace agreements in Ukraine or in the Middle East, they're talking about security security systems, that is really military systems that are going to secure an unstable situation. That seems to be what everyone has in mind. Whereas if you start with the notion of indivisible security, you start with the ability and the need to understand the needs of your neighbors and those you're not necessarily comfortable with. So that's why I would, if anyone asked me my opinion, I would say that's got to be the starting point. And then afterwards, you can talk about all the complications of how you negotiate things and how you give up certain points that you're insisting on, and you accept things that you don't want to accept. And that's diplomacy too. But diplomacy is understanding your common situation. Isn't that the starting point?
Yes, I think you are right. I think we are one humanity. There's only one mankind, I would say, and I think this is what is really dramatic in the current state of mind of the West, is that this exceptionalism, we are the West. It's what Marco Rubio developed in Munich. I mean, and I think that there is in the world a strong longing for peace, stability, prosperity, but it's not only about material things. It's also about acknowledging the equality between people, the equal dignity of all people, and the right of all people to decide about their own future. And if democracy is not based on the equality of peoples, I think it's not worth it. And then you come to other question. We have shared challenges to overcome. Let's say artificial intelligence. Let's say biodiversity. Let's say the unequal location of energy sources in the world. But we also have extraordinary opportunities to develop. If you look at Europe in the Middle Ages, one of the key development factors was these were the European universities. There was a shared system of universities between the countries in the Middle Ages already. Yes. Well, let's imagine that we have a real system of universities at the global level and so on. And I mean, this is a lot about also having people understand the other cultures, because there's a paradox. In the West, we have been speaking about diversity and the diversity would bring creativity and so on. But I mean, then you have the Russians or others, and they are not like us. They don't see the world exactly the same way as we do, and we say no. We cannot accept what they want for themselves. So you see that this is really a paradox. And if we can develop a new state of mind among younger people, and if you take people, if you train them when they are 20 or in their 20s. And if they come to and responsibilities in their 50s. Well, it's extraordinary because they already know each other if they come from different countries and have been trained in the same school. This would be my dream, you know, that that I can teach history in the same class to people who later will be leaders in Asia, in Africa, in Northern or Southern America. That would be extraordinary.
Okay, so on that hopeful note, I think we'll end this discussion. Well, and I definitely want to come back to it. And I know we will be able to do that because we're working together on other projects. But I'd love to pick this up again, just tracing the history of failed diplomacy is in itself an interesting historical exercise. Mm-hmm. So, and I think we're going to see some interesting examples of it in the coming weeks and months. So it was wonderful spending this time with you, Edouard, and we'll see you very shortly again.
Thank you, Peter. It was very, very nice conversation. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.